Thanks so much for having me.
No. Hey, mate, where are you now? Where are we speaking to you?
I'm in Brisbane.
Okay, yeah.
I'm in a place called Indooroopilly.
Yes.
Yep.
You may know it for the golf course. You probably had a few rounds
I
here.
have. It's a cracking course.
I think that's where the big swim club is up there, St. Peter's Western.
Yeah,
right?
that's it. Yeah,
right.
St. Peter's is down the road. I don't live in Indooroopilly, but I'm here at the moment. But Brisbane's hometown, I live pretty close by. I live in a place called Brookfield, and Brookfield was where Gerard Baden Clay lived, and where he murdered his wife Alison, who's a friend of ours. Because we were near neighbours, and our children went to school with theirs.
So, how did you start, Hedley? Because we'll get to the podcast, the phenomenon podcast you've got. But where did you start getting into newspapers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I started just down the highway at the Gold Coast Bulletin. I got my cadetship in 1985, but I started there right at the end of the school year, Year 12 school year, 1984. I finished up at Keeper Park State High, which was a very good rugby league school.
Yeah.
Better than that one Stats played for.
Did you ever don the boots, Hedley? Did you ever don the boots?
Yeah, although I was only good enough for seconds, mate. I never I did make the first, but I got knocked out. So didn't excel as well as some of my good mates did. But I went from school to the Gold Coast Bully as the copy boy, and we didn't have schoolies back then, so I finished up on a Friday and started there on the Monday, and then after 9 months of running around the building as the copy boy, they awarded me with a cadetship, and I loved it. And I started off in sport, and then after a year and a half or so, I went into the newsroom as a police rounds reporter, and I was away.
And now, fast forward. So you've got so many. I mean, you've got all these podcasts. We've got Shandy's Story, Shandy's Legacy, The Night Drive. I've listened to all these. And The Teacher's Pet. Did you, when you were making The Teacher's Pet, and look, it's gone global, this podcast. When you were making this, did you ever think it was going to be this popular?
Look, my wife did. Other friends of mine, like Rebecca Hazel, who was on the Northern Beaches and was a really good friend of the former babysitter, she believed that it would, but I had no idea because I'd never done one before. You know, I was a print journo all my career. I'd never spent time behind the mic. I'd never been on TV. You know, TV producers were too smart for that. So, you know, I just had no idea whether I could make that transition into audio and podcasting. What I understood, though, was the story of Lynn and Chris and the marriage and Bayview and the schoolgirl and Cromer High. Like, it was just so disgusting, so sordid, so unjust, betrayals on every level. And it had affected me when I first wrote about it back in 2001. And made me realise then that it was an amazing case and that it needed revisiting, and which is, you know, why I did revisit it for the podcast in 2018. And I hope that because it had that kind of impact on me and made my news judgment kind of just twitch and quiver, that it would have that same impact on others. But I wasn't, you know, when I did it, I wasn't trying to make it commercially successful. I wasn't trying to, you know, top charts around the world. I wanted to put a cold-blooded killer in the bin. And, you know, I was pretty sure that he had done it. And I became more sure as the investigation wore on through 2018. I spoke to more people and got more documents and so on. And, you know, I think that if you approach these things with a pure commitment and belief, and you know, you still try to be fair to everyone. I mean, there's always the possibility that, you know, it's 1,000,000 to 1, but there's always that very remote possibility that something other than the most rational hypothesis could be right. But you know, listeners hear the genuineness and you know how much you believe in a story. They pick it up. Through these podcasts, they work it out.
When you did, because it is fascinating. If you haven't listened to it, I know you've got. We'll talk about the current one, Bronwyn, coming up. But did you ever approach the Dawsons for an interview at all when you did?
Yeah, I did.
And
Yeah, I approached Peter Dawson, Paul Dawson, and then I rang Chris Dawson a couple, 2 or 3 weeks before we released the first episode. I knew that he knew that I'd been working on this for months because people I'd interviewed, including his daughter, had told him. And I also knew that he despised me because of the stories that I'd written in 2001 when I was a reporter for the Courier Mail in Brisbane. And I'd back then gone to Sydney and done a deep dive into all the files from the inquest that was held in 2001 into Lynn's presumed death. And because I'd had really rare access then to the police brief of evidence.
Were there any safety
so
concerns on your
lucky
behalf?
Oh, look, we had a shooting at our house the following year. 4 bullets, were fired into the house, and we had a long list of suspects. And Lynn's sister, Pat Jenkins, reckoned that Chris should have been high up on that list. But I don't know. I'm not saying he was behind that. But I think that, looking back when I rang Chris on that day in it was May 2018, and I knew I had to try to get him on the record and try to persuade him to talk to me. And he picked up the phone, and he, the audio is really interesting. He says, "Oh yeah, Hedley, I know who you are. I've never really had a good run in the media, and all my words get twisted. So once again, Chris is the victim. He just blames every other bastard."
so where are we at with so he got found guilty, and is he appealing? Is Chris appealing?
Well, he is currently appealing, and that's his right. He's legal aid lawyer. Ran the appeal week before last over a few days in the Court of Criminal Appeal in Sydney, and the judgment on that has been reserved. So they may bring that down next week, next month. Who knows? Could even be. Well, I doubt it would be next year. But the 3 judges who heard it asked a lot of pretty pointed questions. Seemed that they were really across the detail of the case, as you would expect them to be. They, were trying to comprehend Chris's lawyer's argument that a young mum, Lynn, who was utterly devoted to her 2 little girls, who had significant equity in a house worth almost $300,000 in 1982 at Bayview. It was a lot of money back then. Who had very close ties to her sister and 2 brothers, her mum and her dad, who worked part-time. How, the judges asked, do you say she starts a new life?
Yeah.
How do you say there's a rational hypothesis that is consistent with Chris, being innocent, whereby Lynn just becomes like some sort of mafia don and changes her identity and, goes and remains unseen, invisible, doesn't reach out to anyone in her life. A woman who wanted and had surgery so she could conceive children, who couldn't bear to be away from her kids, but then according to Chris, started a new life and decided to stay away, and so on. I mean, it's just so deeply stupid and dishonest. It's laughable, but I guess that's the only feather he's got to fly with.
We're joined right now by National Chief Correspondent of The Australian and 2-time Gold Walkley Award-winning journalist Hedley Thomas. Now, Hedley, your latest investigative podcast for The Australian focuses on a 31-year-old cold case from Lennox Head in the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales. It's called Bronwyn. Talk to us about this new podcast.
Yeah. So, guys, Bronwyn Winfield, she disappeared from her home in May 1993. And she, unlike Lynn, was determined to get a divorce from her husband, John Winfield. He was a builder, bricklayer, a very good surfer. He'd been married twice before. He and Bronwyn had been married for 6 years. Bronwyn had been married once before, and she came into the marriage with one child, Crystal. John had one child, Jodie, from one of his 2 previous marriages, and Bronwyn and John, while married, had a 3rd daughter, and her name was Lauren, and they were from the Shire, from Cronulla, but they moved to Lennox Head because John, being a very keen surfer and loving the beach breaks and the Boulders Beach and Sharps and all those fantastic surfing beaches on Lennox, he decided that that's where they should go. That's where he'd gone to build a house with his 2nd wife. And when they split the sheets, he met Bronwyn, he said, well, let's go back to Lennox and build the dream home there. And he built that home, and it was his castle. He loved it. But by all accounts, John was a very possessive man. He was an introvert, quite reclusive, didn't like visitors to the house, and he also had a very deep-seated obsessive compulsive disorder around cleanliness in the house and stains and spills on the carpet. If you spilt crumbs on the tiles, or Bronwyn's peeling potatoes and starch from the spuds would go onto the taps, according to what she told friends and what friends observed and have told me, it would set him off. He could just rage over that. So it must have been a very difficult situation. So Bronwyn had decided it was unsustainable, and she decided to leave him.
So, Hedley, it sounds very similar to The Teacher's Pet, like Lynette.
Well, look, parts of it are very similar. We've got to be careful, though. Every case is different.
Right.
John, of course, he has absolutely emphatically denied foul play. He's never been charged with anything. The police wanted to charge him. They wanted to charge him despite the fact that the first police investigation into Bronwyn's disappearance was utterly disgraceful. And those aren't my words. They're the words of the copper who came along after that investigation, a bloke called Glenn Taylor. He was a detective sergeant in the late 90s, and Bronwyn disappeared in 93. Glenn gets the case 5 years later after Bronwyn's family says, look, we're not really happy that the local police have just treated her as a missing person. It's so suspicious. She loved her children, and the circumstances were really weird. I mean, she had separated from John. She'd moved back into the family home after trying to live in a townhouse with her kids for a while, but she couldn't make ends meet, and John was working in Sydney. So she moves back into the family home. John finds out about it, and he flies back from Sydney to Ballina and then goes to the house in Lennox, the castle that he'd built, and he's the last person to see her alive. He says she got into a car that pulled up after she'd made a phone call, and she'd told him, a bit like Lynn, that she needed a bit of a break from the kids. These mums who need a break and never get seen again. A bit of a pattern there. But that's what he says happened, and the local police accepted that, and they didn't take a statement from anybody for 5 years. Not even a statement. Can you believe that? A mum who's gone missing, it's out of character. She's got a job. She loves her children. She had plans. She was going to meet her solicitor the next day, Monday, the 17th of May, 1993. Obviously, she doesn't turn up, and no one has cited or heard from her since. So the case went to a coroner, and the coroner, Karl Milovanovich, he held an inquest in Lismore in 2002. Lismore's about half an hour from Lennox. And that coroner was coincidentally the same coroner who had heard Lynn Dawson's case in 2003, and he was a very astute senior magistrate back then, and he made a finding in Lynn's case that Chris Dawson should be prosecuted for murder. He made the same finding in Bronwyn's case. He said that her husband should be prosecuted for murder. In both those cases, the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery, said, well, it's no body and there's insufficient evidence, we're not prosecuting. Now, minds will differ on whether that was the right decision, and obviously different DPPs will approach cases with different mindsets. It's probably a very subjective decision sometimes, even though you've got the same set of facts that are presented to different prosecutors. Some might be more gung-ho than others. Some might think that without a body, you're really pushing it. But in any event, both Lynn's case and Bronwyn's case ended with there being, repeated refusals by the DPP to prosecute. And what I'm trying to do with Bronwyn's case is, and actually having a lot of success already. It's amazing how powerful, the podcast reach is. But uncover material from witnesses who haven't talked to the police before, because as good as the police investigation was in 1998 when they started to do it properly with Glenn Taylor, they didn't have the Loudhailer effect and the snowballing that comes with a podcast investigation that reaches people and that when you align it with all of the resources of the Australian newspaper and our website and the stories that people read and people who knew stuff about Bronwyn and John and have not come forward before are now coming forward, and it's just amazing.
Hedley, members from the public, how did you get onto the Bronwyn story? I'd imagine that after the success of all your podcasts, would you get people saying, "Oh, Hedley, can you look into this for me, or can you look into that?" I'm interested to know about the Bronwyn. How long have you been working on this?
Mate, it's a really good question, because I got onto this case, Bronwyn, as a result of Lynn's case. And I got onto it because when I was interviewing the former coroner who did Lynn's case, Karl Milovanovich, way back in late 2017, 6 months before I had a single episode of The Teacher's Pet. I didn't even know the name for the podcast series back then, but I was talking to Karl and he'd kindly granted me an interview in his lounge room, in his home. It was a week before Christmas. And he told me about Bronwyn's case and how he had run an inquest into her disappearance the year before he did Lynn's, and how troubling he found it. And man, I made a note then to try to check it out. And over the last 6.5 years, with the folder I opened way back in late 2017, I've just been chipping away, putting stuff into it, getting to know her family, her brother, her sister-in-law, her half-sister, her friends, trying to work out, what might have happened in this case. And it's just been this kind of labour that has gone on quietly while I've been working on these other podcast series. I knew I wouldn't be able to start a proper production of Bronwyn's case and an investigative podcast until this year. But I realised that I had clear air in 2024. I could commit, half a year to it, and I already had all of this material. I'd been doing some interviews through 2019, 2020, 2021, and all of this stuff. Thanks to iCloud and everything else on your laptop, it was all there. It was all right for me to revisit. I kept all my emails and text messages with people, and